Last time, I told you about Walt. About the wrong ledger, the one with a ceiling, mistaken for the one with none. I promised you the second half. Not the philosophy this time. The mechanics. The exact order. Because knowing you should automate the unbounded game, and knowing what order to automate it in, are two very different pieces of knowledge. Only one of them actually moves money. The order is the machinery. Get it right, and the philosophy runs itself without you. Get it wrong, and you can believe every word of video 1 and still end up nowhere at all. Quick version, if you're new here, there are two ledgers. One has a ceiling, what you can cut. One doesn't, what you can build. Walt spent 30 years mastering the wrong one. The full case is one video back, the frugal trap. Today, I give you the order. Because I have watched more people fail from doing the right things in the wrong sequence than from doing the wrong things entirely. Doing the right things out of order isn't a small inefficiency. It is often the entire difference between a plan that runs itself for 30 years and a plan that quietly stalls somewhere around year 3, without ever announcing that it has stalled. Dolores ran a dental hygiene practice out of a strip mall for 22 years. Same strip mall as a tax preparer, a nail salon, a shop that only ever seemed to sell phone cases. She was, by every visible measure, the opposite of Walt. She did not clip coupons. She did not recoil from a restaurant bill. She was, if anything, a little embarrassing to her more frugal sister, the kind of woman who bought the good olive oil without checking the price first, who tipped 40% at the diner because the waitress had a rough morning and Dolores could tell, who took her staff out for a real lunch, not a pizza in the break room, on the last Friday of every month without fail for 2 decades. She kept a small fishing boat at the marina 2 towns over, more than she used it, because she liked knowing it was there. None of this made her irresponsible. It made her, on the surface, the kind of person financial advice is rarely written for, the one who was never going to be lectured about lattes. And yet, at 54, Dolores had less saved than Walt did at the same age. Not because she spent recklessly, she didn't. Because she automated nothing, in any order. She meant to. She'd set up a retirement account once, at 26, funded it for 4 months, and then a slow month at the practice made her pause the contribution, just until things stabilized. She remembers making that call to the benefits line herself, standing in the back office between patients, telling the woman on the phone it would only be for a quarter or 2. Things stabilized 11 years later. She never restarted it. Not from a decision, from the absence of one. Every January for a decade she told herself this was the year she'd set it up properly, and every January became a February, and the February became a slow season, and the slow season became a reason to wait for the fall. By the time 11 years had passed, the balance in that account had grown only from 4 months of contributions and whatever the market happened to do to them, a few $1,000s, frozen in time, while 3 decades of income moved past it entirely untouched. The account just sat there, a museum piece from a version of herself she'd stopped being without noticing. Here is what's important about Dolores: she was never against saving. She simply never built the order that makes saving happen without her. Every dollar that reached her checking account required a decision from her, conscious, deliberate, exhausting, to become a saved dollar instead of a spent one. A good year meant a bonus to herself, a trip, new equipment for the office, all of it defensible, none of it wrong on its own. A raise meant a nicer car lease renewal. A strong quarter meant new dental chairs a year earlier than strictly necessary. None of it was waste. All of it was choice, exercised in real time, with nothing standing between the money and wherever her attention happened to land that month. A slow year meant nothing extra happened, which felt responsible, and also meant nothing extra was ever saved either. And decisions, made daily, for 30 years, are the least reliable financial instrument ever invented, not because Dolores had weak willpower, but because nobody's willpower was built to win that particular argument, alone, thousands of times in a row, forever. Her bookkeeper mentioned it to her exactly twice, years apart. The first time, going over year-end numbers, she said, almost as an aside, "You know that retirement account's basically just sitting there, right? Nothing's gone in since I've worked for you." Dolores laughed and said she'd get to it after tax season. The second time was 6 years later, nearly the same words, nearly the same laugh, nearly the same answer. Tax season, every single year, turned out to be a permanent excuse dressed up as a temporary one. Nobody forced Dolores to keep saying it. She simply never built anything that didn't require her to say something at all. Her sister, the frugal one, used to tell her she was going to end up broke and surprised. She wasn't wrong about the surprised part. What she got wrong was the mechanism. Dolores wasn't going to end up broke from spending too much. She was going to end up merely comfortable, decades later than she should have been, from a system that was never built in the first place. The sister assumed the danger was overspending. The actual danger, the one nobody in Dolores's life had language for, was simply the absence of any structure at all standing between her paycheck and her checking account. Two entirely different diagnoses. Only one of them would have actually helped her. The myth is this, that saving is a character trait. That some people are savers and some people are spenders, the way some people are morning people and some aren't. It is comforting because it removes the need for a system. If it's who you are, there's nothing to build, only something to hope you were born with. I hear a version of this in almost every conversation I have about money. People describe their own habits the way they describe eye color, as though it were fixed at birth rather than built, one repeated transfer at a time, by whoever happened to set up the structure first. I have sat across the table from savers who ended up with less than spenders, and spenders who ended up with more than savers, often enough that I stopped being surprised by it. The correlation people assume exists between personality and outcome is far weaker than the correlation between structure and outcome. It is also almost entirely false. Walt was, by every measure, a saver. Dolores, by disposition, was not. And yet Walt ended up with less usable wealth than a woman who spent freely her whole life, because the order Walt followed capped itself, and the order Dolores never built simply didn't exist. Neither trait mattered as much as the architecture underneath it. This is good news, actually. It means you don't need to become a different kind of person, a more disciplined person, a person with more natural willpower than you were handed. Neither of them needed a personality transplant. They needed the same 6 rungs, in the same order, running in the background of a life instead of depending on the foreground of it. Rung 1, the float. A small cushion, enough to keep one bad week from becoming a bad decade. This is not your whole emergency fund. This is just enough that a flat tire, or a dead car battery, or a copay you didn't plan for, doesn't go on a credit card at 22% interest. Most people skip straight past this one because it feels too small to matter. It matters precisely because it's small, it's the rung that keeps every rung above it from getting knocked over by an ordinary Tuesday. It sounds too minor to bother automating, and that's exactly the trap. The rungs people skip as not worth setting up are usually the ones whose absence causes the most damage, because they're the ones that get tested first, on the most ordinary weeks. Rung 2, the employer match, if you have one. If someone offers to double part of your money for showing up, that is the closest thing to a guaranteed, unbounded return you will find anywhere, in any market, in any year. Skipping it to build a bigger cash cushion is optimizing the wrong ledger, the mistake from video 1, wearing a different hat. I have met people who took years to claim a match sitting right there in their own benefits paperwork, unclaimed, because nobody ever told them the order mattered more than the intention. Some plans phase the match in over several years of tenure. Read the actual plan document once, not the summary you were handed on your first day. It's worth the 20 minutes. Rung 3, the high-interest debt. Anything charging you more than you could reasonably expect to earn investing it. This isn't frugality anymore, it's stopping the bleeding before you try to build muscle. There is no rung 5 sophisticated enough to outrun a rung 3 you never dealt with. The math simply doesn't work, no matter how good the investment happens to be. There is one narrow exception worth naming: if the interest rate is genuinely low, on a small percentage of debt, treat it like rung 4 instead of rung 3. But be honest with yourself about what genuinely low actually means before you use that exception to skip the rung entirely. Rung 4, the real emergency fund. 3 to 6 months, size to your actual life, not a number you saw in a headline. Dolores, notably, never had this either. What she had instead was a general sense that things had always worked out, which is not the same instrument, and doesn't behave the same way the one-time things don't work out. Somewhere between 3 and 6 months feels arbitrary until the month it isn't, until a slow season, or a layoff, or a diagnosis, and suddenly the width of that cushion is the only number in your entire financial life that matters. Rung 5, the automatic, unbounded investing. This is the rung Walt never reached, because he was still on rungs he'd already completed 30 years earlier, still polishing them, unable to tell himself the earlier work was finished. It is also the rung Dolores never reached, because she never built rung 1 in a way that held, and a ladder missing its bottom rung isn't a shorter ladder, it's not a ladder at all. This is the rung that compounds the longest, which means it's also the rung where being early matters more than being large. A small amount started now outperforms a larger amount started 10 years from now, more often than intuition expects. Rung 6, and this one surprises people, is deliberate, permitted spending. Once the first 5 rungs are automated, spending what's left without guilt is not undisciplined. It's the entire point. The ledger with no ceiling doesn't need your restaurant money to prove itself, doesn't need you to feel bad about the good olive oil, doesn't need every dollar to be justified in a spreadsheet before you're allowed to enjoy it. Some people reach rung 6 and don't know how to use it. That's a real problem, and it's the subject of the next video. But it is a different problem from never reaching it, and it's worth knowing which one you actually have. Notice something about Dolores in this frame. She was already living, unknowingly, at rung 6, deliberate, guilt-free spending, without ever having built rungs 1 through 5 underneath her. She had the top of the ladder with no ladder beneath it. That is not indulgence. That is a house with a roof and no walls, standing only because nothing has tried to lean on it yet. Here is the part almost nobody does, and it's the part that actually makes the order matter: automate the transfer between rungs, not just the saving. Set the percentage, set the date, connect the accounts, and never touch it again except to revisit the numbers once a year. If moving money from rung to rung requires you to remember, to decide, to feel motivated on a given Tuesday, it will eventually stop happening, the same way Dolores's retirement contribution stopped happening the moment it required a phone call to restart instead of nothing at all. The mechanics are almost insultingly simple: a scheduled transfer, on the day after payday, moving a fixed amount or a fixed percentage from checking into each rung in order, before the money has had a chance to feel like spending money at all. Dolores could have set this up in under 20 minutes at any point in 30 years. The barrier was never technical. It was that nothing in her life ever forced the 20 minutes to happen. The people who stay on this order for 30 years are not more disciplined than Walt, and they are not less carefree than Dolores. They just removed the moment where discipline was required. Dolores's failure and Walt's failure look like opposites. One overcorrected, one never corrected at all. They were the same failure. Both required a recurring act of will their future selves eventually decline to perform. Walt's future self kept cutting when there was nothing left worth cutting, Dolores's future self kept postponing when there was nothing stopping her from starting. The order only works when the order runs itself, without asking either of them to show up and decide, again, for the 10,000th time. Someone watching this is thinking, but what if I need the money in rung 5 before I'm old? What if life happens? Life will happen. That's precisely why rungs 1 through 4 exist before rung 5, they are the answer to that exact fear, built in advance, so that rung 5 can stay untouched long enough to become what it's for. The order isn't rigid because I enjoy rigidity. It's ordered because each rung is insurance for the one above it, catching whatever the rung above it can't afford to catch on its own. Someone else watching this is thinking, I don't have an employer match. Does the order still apply to me? It does. You simply move from rung 1 to rung 3 without stopping at a rung that doesn't exist for you. The order isn't about which employer you happen to have. It's about which risks are allowed to threaten your future before the future gets a chance to defend itself. Skip the rung that doesn't apply. Never skip the reasoning behind why it was there. That's the order. Not a philosophy this time, a checklist you can act on this week. 6 rungs. 1 automated transfer between each. Set it up once. Let the order carry the weight your willpower was never going to carry alone, no matter how much of it you happen to have. If you want to understand why rung 6, the permission to spend, is so much harder for some people to actually use than to build, that's where I'm headed next. Because there is a version of not spending that looks like discipline and is actually its own kind of trap, dressed up so convincingly that even the person living inside it can't always see it. I'll show you her name next time.